The hunger in Olivia Foster's stomach gnawed like a wild animal as she stood trembling at the door of Sterling's general store, clutching her late husband's Bible with white knuckles. 3 days without a proper meal had left her dizzy, and the drought of 1876 had shown no mercy on the barren patch of land. She now struggled to maintain alone in the unforgiving territory of western Colorado. "I ain't running no charity, madam," Mr. Sterling had told her just yesterday when she'd asked for credit. "Times is hard for everyone." The midday sun beat down mercilessly as she pushed open the door, the little bell announcing her presence. She'd made up her mind during the sleepless night. The Bible was the last thing of value. She owned the last piece of James she had left, but sentiment wouldn't fill her belly. "Afternoon, Mrs. Foster," said Sterling, a portly man with spectacles that constantly slipped down his sweaty nose. His eyes flickered to the leather-bound Bible in her hands. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice stronger than she felt, "I'd like to trade this for some flour, beans, and whatever else it might be worth." Sterling took the Bible, turning it over in his hands with a frown. The gold leaf on the edges of the pages caught the light streaming through the dusty windows. "It's a fine book, madam, but it's worth something," she insisted, fighting back the burning in her eyes. "The leather is good, the pages are crisp." The storekeeper looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Foster, folks around here got their own Bibles. Those that don't, well, they ain't interested in getting one." A shadow fell across the counter as the door opened and closed behind Olivia. Heavy boots thudded on the wooden floor. "Afternoon, Preston," Sterling nodded to the newcomer. "Afternoon, Charlie," replied a deep voice. Olivia didn't turn around. The humiliation of being denied even this trade was enough. She didn't need an audience for it. 23 years old and already a widow of 6 months, she felt the weight of failure pressing down on her slender shoulders. The drought had taken her crops, pneumonia had taken her husband, and now hunger was threatening to take what remained of her strength. "The lady offering to trade her Bible?" the newcomer asked, stepping up beside Olivia. She glanced up, meeting the gaze of a tall man whose eyes were the precise color of the summer sky. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Though not smiling now, Preston Slade, he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "New foreman over at the R. "Olivia Foster," she replied stiffly, embarrassed by her circumstances. Preston's eyes dropped to the Bible still in Sterling's hands. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and withdrew several bills, placing them on the counter. "Give the lady whatever she needs, Charlie, up to this amount." Sterling's eyebrows shot up. "That's mighty generous, Preston." "And Mrs. Foster," Preston continued, gently taking the Bible from Sterling's hands and returning it to her, "you'll want to keep this. You might need it for our vows someday." Olivia stared at him, stunned by both his charity and his audacity. "I beg your pardon." His lips quirked in a smile that transformed his face, making him appear younger than she'd first thought, probably not more than 28 or 29. "Just a feeling I have, madam." He tipped his hat again. "Good day to you both." Olivia watched him leave, speechless, the Bible clutched against her chest. She had no idea who Preston Slade was or why he'd helped her, but his words rang in her ears as if he'd shouted them. "Our vows." The very suggestion was preposterous. She was still in mourning, still wearing the black dress that marked her as a widow, and yet, she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest at the brief connection with those summer sky eyes. "Well," Sterling cleared his throat, "what'll it be, Mrs. Foster?" 2 days later, Olivia was in her garden, attempting to coax life from the parched soil, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her straighten. Shielding her eyes from the sun, she watched as a rider approached her small homestead. Preston Slade dismounted from a handsome chestnut gelding before she could retreat inside. He carried a burlap sack over one shoulder. "Mrs. Foster," he called, removing his hat as he approached. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Slade," she acknowledged, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. I owe you my thanks for your kindness at the store. No thanks necessary. He glanced around the modest property, the small cabin James had built, the struggling garden, the empty corral where their horse had been before she'd had to sell it. I brought you something. He extended the sack. When she hesitated, he added, please, I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd accept. Cautiously, Olivia took the sack and peered inside. Seeds, different varieties for her garden. These are drought-resistant, Preston explained. The ranch has been experimenting with them. They need less water. Why? She asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Why what? Why are you helping me? Preston looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Because you need it. Because it's the right thing to do? Take your pick, Mrs. Foster. She studied him, trying to discern his motives. His clothing was simple but well-made denims, a cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing tanned, muscular forearms and a vest that had seen better days. The gun at his hip was worn and well-used, not for show. I don't accept charity, she said finally. Good, because I'm not offering any. He gestured toward her garden. I need someone to test these seeds, see how they do in different soil. Consider yourself employed by the RRR. I'll come by in a week to check your progress. Before she could argue, he was back on his horse, tipping his hat with that same transformative smile. Good day, Mrs. Foster. Olivia stood holding the sack of seeds long after he'd disappeared from view. Part of her wanted to chase after him and throw his job offer back in his face. But the practical part, the part that had lain awake at night wondering how she would survive, knew she couldn't afford pride. She knelt in the dirt and began planting the new seeds, telling herself that the fluttering sensation in her stomach was simply relief, not anticipation of seeing Preston Slade again. True to his word, Preston returned the following week, and then the week after that. Each visit brought some new task for her, recording the growth of the plants, testing a new technique for water conservation. The payment was always the same, provisions she desperately needed but would never have asked for. On his fourth visit, nearly a month after their first encounter, he arrived to find her hanging laundry on the line, humming a tune her mother had taught her. She'd abandoned her widow's black for a faded blue dress that had once been her best. You have a lovely voice, Preston said, startling her. Olivia pressed a hand to her chest. You shouldn't sneak up on people, Mr. Slade. Preston, he corrected as he had each time before, and I wasn't sneaking. You were just lost in your song. He dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post, then hefted a small wooden crate from his saddlebag. I've brought you something. More work, she asked, a teasing note entering her voice before she could stop it. Of a sort, though this might be more pleasure than business. He placed the crate on her porch steps. Inside were books, 5 of them, their spines barely cracked. Olivia reached for one with reverent hands. The Scarlet Letter, she read. I've never read it. The ranch owner's wife is an avid reader. She sends these along, thought you might enjoy them. He watched her thumb through the pages. You like to read. I love it, Olivia admitted. I used to teach at the schoolhouse in my hometown before I married James. She caught herself, surprised at how easily she'd spoken her late husband's name. It had been nearly impossible just weeks ago. Preston leaned against the porch railing. Where was home? Pennsylvania. James came west for land, wrote to me of the opportunities. I followed 6 months later and we married the day I arrived. She smiled at the memory. We had 2 good years before. He was lucky, Preston said softly. To have someone willing to follow him into the unknown. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Olivia looked away first. Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Slade? Preston, she corrected herself. It seems the least I could offer for all your help, he smiled. I'd like that very much. That afternoon changed something between them. Over coffee, Olivia learned that Preston had come west from Boston after the war, seeking a fresh start. He'd worked his way up from ranch hand to foreman through hard work and a natural way with horses. I don't mind admitting I was running from something, he said, turning his coffee cup in his large hands. The war changed a lot of us, changed how we saw the world and ourselves in it. What did you do in the war? Cavalry, thought I was quite the horseman before that. The army taught me otherwise. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. But that's a story for another time. As summer progressed into fall, Preston's visits became more frequent, and the pretense of work gradually fell away. Sometimes he brought books or supplies. Sometimes he simply came to help with chores around the homestead. He fixed the leaking roof, repaired the corral fence, and on one memorable occasion brought a gentle mare for Olivia to use for ranch business. He insisted. The garden flourished despite the continuing drought, providing Olivia with enough vegetables to preserve for the coming winter. Some she traded in town for other necessities. Each time she entered Sterling's store, she remembered that first encounter and Preston's outrageous comment about Vows. It seemed less outrageous now. By October, the first snowfall had dusted the mountains visible from Olivia's front porch. She and Preston sat side by side on the steps, watching the sunset paint those snow-capped peaks in gold and pink. "Winter comes early up here," Preston observed, his shoulder warm against hers. "James and I were so unprepared our first year," Olivia reminisced. "We nearly froze before we figured out how to properly insulate the cabin." "And this year?" Preston asked, turning to look at her. She met his gaze steadily. "I think I'll manage just fine." Something shifted in his expression. "Olivia," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of a wagon approaching. They both stood as Charlie Sterling's delivery wagon came into view. The storekeeper rarely made deliveries. People usually came to him. "Evening, Mrs. Foster, Preston," Charlie called, pulling his team to a halt. His expression was grave. "Thought you should know right away. There's been talk in town." "What kind of talk?" Preston asked, moving subtly in front of Olivia. "Land company men. They've been asking about unclaimed properties and those that might be vulnerable." Charlie's eyes flickered to Olivia. "They're particularly interested in properties with water access like yours, Mrs. Foster. That creek at the back of your land is mighty valuable in these parts." "But this land is mine," Olivia protested. "James purchased it fair and square." "Did he file all the proper paperwork?" Charlie asked gently. "These companies, they look for any technicality." Olivia's heart sank. James had mentioned paperwork he needed to complete just before he fell ill. She'd assumed it had been done, but now— "I'll look into it," Preston said firmly. "Thank you for the warning, Charlie." After the storekeeper left, Olivia went inside to search through James's papers. Preston built up the fire as she spread documents across the kitchen table, searching frantically for proof of ownership. "Here," she finally said, holding up a deed. "But it says pending final approval at the bottom." She looked up at Preston, fear evident in her eyes. "What does that mean?" Preston examined the document. "It means James started the process but didn't complete it. The land office would have the final papers. And if they don't," he met her gaze directly, "then your claim could be challenged." Olivia sat heavily in the chair. "I can't lose this place, Preston. It's all I have left of him, of the life we were building." Preston knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You won't lose it, I promise you that." The intensity in his voice made her believe him despite the odds. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'm not about to let anyone take what's yours." He hesitated, then added softly, "And because I care about you, Olivia, more than I should, perhaps." She didn't pull her hands away. "I care about you too." They stayed like that for a long moment, the admission hanging between them. Finally, Preston stood. "I'll ride to the county seat tomorrow, see what I can find out about your paperwork." "Thank you," Olivia whispered. As he prepared to leave, she retrieved James's Bible from the shelf. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his hands. "It's brought me comfort in difficult times. Maybe it will do the same for you." Preston looked surprised but accepted the book with reverence. "I'll guard it with my life." "Just come back safely," she replied. "That's all I ask." Preston returned 3 days later, exhaustion etched on his face. The news wasn't good. James had indeed failed to complete the final paperwork, and now the Blackwater Land Company was making a claim on the property. citing a technicality in the homesteading laws. "They're saying the claim was abandoned," Preston explained as they sat at her kitchen table. "Since James died and you've been struggling, abandoned? I've been here every day," Olivia's voice rose in anger. "Working this land with my bare hands, I know," Preston soothed, "but they're arguing that a single woman can't properly work a claim this size." "It's ridiculous, but they have lawyers and money." Olivia paced the small cabin. "What can we do?" Preston was quiet for a long moment. "There is one option, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. Tell me. If you were married, your husband could file a new claim. The land would transfer smoothly." He wouldn't meet her eyes as he said it. Olivia stared at him. "Are you suggesting I find a husband simply to keep my land?" "No," Preston finally looked up. "I'm suggesting you marry me." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's not funny, Preston," Olivia finally said. "It wasn't meant to be." He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Look, I know this isn't how either of us imagined this, but I care for you, Olivia, deeply. I think you care for me too." "I do, but then is it so terrible to consider a life together?" His eyes searched hers. "I'm not asking out of pity or just to save your land. I'm asking because every day I don't see you feels wasted. Because when I think of my future, you're in it." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "It's too soon." "James has only been gone 8 months, Preston finished gently. "I know, and I would wait years if that's what you needed, but we don't have years. We have days, maybe weeks before the Blackwater Land Company files their claim." Olivia pulled her hands away and walked to the window, staring out at the land she and James had worked so hard to build. "I need time to think." "Of course," Preston said, though disappointment was clear in his voice. "I'll come back tomorrow." After he left, Olivia sat on the porch steps until the stars came out, thinking about James, about Preston, about the life she'd imagined and the one she now faced. When dawn broke, she was still there, her decision made. Preston arrived as promised, his face tense with anticipation. Olivia met him at the gate, James's Bible in her hands. "You forgot this," she said, holding it out to him. He took it, confusion evident. "I thought you wanted me to have it." "I do," she said softly, "but you were right that first day in the store. I'll need it for our vows." The transformation on Preston's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You mean it? You'll marry me?" "Yes," Olivia nodded, a small smile forming. "But not just for the land, because, as you said, every day I don't see you feels wasted." Preston gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. When he set her down, his expression grew serious again. "I promise to make you happy, Olivia, to be a good husband, a good partner." "And I promise the same," she replied, "to be your wife, your partner in all things." They were married 3 days later in the small church in town, with Charlie Sterling and his wife as witnesses. The bride wore her blue dress, and the groom wore a new shirt purchased for the occasion. The Bible that had once belonged to James Foster was held between them as they spoke their vows. The very next day, they rode together to the county seat to file the new land claim, now under the name of Preston Slade and his wife, Olivia. The clerk at the land office raised eyebrows at the fresh marriage certificate, but the paperwork was sound. The Blackwater Land Company would have no claim. As they rode home to their land, their future Preston reached across the space between their horses and took Olivia's hand. "No regrets?" he asked. Olivia looked at their entwined hands, then up at the man who had gone from stranger to savior to husband in the span of a few short months. "None," she answered truthfully. "That winter was harsh, with snowdrifts that sometimes reached the windowsills of the cabin. But inside was warmth and light and a love that grew deeper with each passing day." Preston moved his things from the bunkhouse at the Triple R to the cabin, which suddenly seemed less small and more cozy with 2 people sharing the space. They learned each other's habits, preferences, the rhythms of daily life together. Preston discovered that Olivia sang while she cooked, and that she couldn't sleep if her feet were cold. Olivia learned that Preston read poetry late into the night and that he had nightmares sometimes about the war, though they grew less frequent as the weeks passed. By spring, They had expanded the garden and built a proper chicken coop. Preston brought home 2 milk cows and a young bull, the beginning of what he hoped would become a small herd. The drought finally broke with spring rains that turned the land green and filled the creek to overflowing. On the anniversary of their first meeting at Sterling's store, Preston presented Olivia with a gift, a hand-carved rocking chair for the porch. "For when we have children," he explained, running his hand along the smooth wood. "I thought you might like to rock them here where you can see the mountains." Olivia's smile was radiant as she took his hand and placed it on her slightly rounded belly. "That might be sooner than you think." Preston's eyes widened. We're going to have a baby," Olivia confirmed. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct." The joy on Preston's face was something Olivia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her in his arms, careful now in a way he hadn't been before, and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. "Happier than I ever thought possible again," she assured him. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Olivia thought about the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A drought, a death, a desperate attempt to trade a Bible for bread, and the kindness of a stranger who saw something in her worth saving. "Preston," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. He tightened his arm around her. "That day in the store when you said I'd need the Bible for our vows. Did you really know even then?" She felt rather than saw his smile as he pressed a kiss to her hair. "I knew something important had just happened, that I'd met someone who was going to change my life. The rest was just hope." "Hope," Olivia repeated, placing her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. "That's a good name if it's a girl." "Hope Slade," Preston tested the name. "I like it." As they drifted off to sleep, the Bible that had once nearly been traded for bread sat on the bedside table, a silent witness to the power of faith, kindness, and love that could bloom even in the harshest of circumstances. Inside its cover, Preston had inscribed their wedding date, the first entry in what would become a family record spanning generations. And years later, when their children and grandchildren asked how they met, Preston would always begin the story the same way. "Your grandmother tried to trade her Bible for bread, and I told her to keep it because she'd need it for our vows." To which Olivia would always reply, with a smile that had only grown more beautiful with age, "It was the best advice I ever took." Their story became legend in the small Colorado town that grew up around them, the widow and the cowboy who built a life together from the most unlikely of beginnings. Their ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the county, known not just for its fine cattle but for its hospitality and the love that formed its foundation. And on their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, Preston and Olivia renewed their vows with the same Bible held between them, its pages now filled with the record of a family built on hope, faith, and a love that had sustained them through all of life's seasons. "I told you you'd need it," Preston whispered as they stood before the preacher once again, his hair now white but his eyes still the same summer sky blue that had captured Olivia's heart all those years ago. "You did," Olivia agreed, her hand steady in his. "And you were right about everything else, too." As the sun set over the mountains they both loved, casting the same gold and pink light that had illuminated their first evening together on the porch steps, they sealed their renewed promises with a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first and all the depth of a love tested and strengthened by time. A love that had begun with hunger and desperation had become a feast that nourished not just 2 lives, but an entire legacy.